hello, and good evening. I am Sam, and you are once again listening to Literacy. Well, I'm doing full radio voice. Hi. It's Saturday. It's 2 minutes past 9, and you're live with Literacy. Yeah, I thought I was coming down with a bit of a cold yesterday, and it was kind of easing up by the afternoon, but I feel like it's still hanging around in the voice a little bit. So I'm just gonna take it down here, and I'm Sam, and you a chat. Indeed. 9:02 already? Yeah, sorry. 9:03 now even. Today has gone way too fast. Yes, it has. See, I need to remember that husky voice, because I'm trying to think if I'm going to use it for one of the stories that I'll be reading tonight. I'm not sure. We'll see. I don't know. Not that voice exactly. But yeah, hello everybody. How are we doing? Joey has emerged from his box. Hi, you're very... So he's had another dose of the flea tablet today, and is very itchy as a result. I take it as a sign that it's working. The fleas are unfortunately biting him, but that is because he is delicious poison to them right now, and then they will stop pestering the cat, and all will be well. But he is currently having a bit of a bad evening. Thank you, Lady Mephistopheles, for the resub, and reminding me that I have some other resubs to get through. Arian, thank you very much for the 22 months. I'm glad that you were awake for once to catch this one. Thunder, thank you for the 23 months. You were convinced Twitch can't count? You were sure it was only a couple of weeks ago that you were saying it's 20 or 22 or something? Well, I mean, maybe it was a couple of months ago, who knows? But yes, it does go a little bit funny with the numbers. But also, time. What is it? Parola, how exciting, a button. Thank you very much for the 3 months. Lovely to see you. And yeah, Lady Mephistopheles, thank you for the 10 months. With a heart. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the resub. Thank you all for being here. This is, it's a delight seeing so many people. Erin, you have to learn that video games make you tired. Yes. Yeah. Everyone that's joined the Palea Club this weekend, welcome to Palea Club. Suddenly it's 4 a.m. Oops. I wonder... Just thinking, I wonder how much of this evening's sort of craft along with the stream will be digital craft along of people making furniture for their houses and stuff this evening. That's what I would be doing. Majestic Sanders, you're getting ready for sleep. Alarm set for 3 a.m. for the Perseids. Yeah, as Lucy said, it is too cloudy here. Because that's what happens. 80% of the time when there is any kind of meteor shower, increased astral activity for people to watch. Ooh, lunar eclipse tonight? Clouds. Not rain, clouds. Just clouds, just rolling in and going, nah, I'm just going to scooch on by you there, bud, and sit in the way. It's great. You best believe you're on it? Heck yeah. Parola, you're crocheting? Ooh, nice. And you were considering it, but your laptop wouldn't survive video and game, but video game. Okay, Joey wishes to leave. 1 second. I return. He has also sneezed directly into my face this evening. Not long before stream, he came and sat on my chest because I was lying down and just right in the face. So that's where we're at. It's good. But yes, how are we all? Hello, welcome in. I am still sat in the slightly awkward sort of configuration 2 in my room, which means I'm sat on the bed rather than on a chair, and it's not even the comfiest of chairs, but it's a little bit more designed for human sitting for an extended amount of time than side of bed. But I'm hoping maybe we'll get the desk sorted out tomorrow, then I might actually have a desk. Who knows? That would be exciting. But yeah, just I don't know, probably won't affect the stream too much, but in case it does, then that's what's going on. I need one of those wedge pillows to lean on. Ooh, I don't know how that would work in this setup, but maybe. Yeah, I have for you tonight some further weird tales of William Hope Hodgson. we have another Karnaki adventure, The Whistling Room. It's a room that whistles, which I think it's fine. It doesn't, like, I'll get to it in a bit. But The Whistling Room, which is going to come up, and then after the break, The Thing in the Weeds, which bears a little bit of relation to one or two previous stories that we've read. See if you can figure out if Hodgson had a bit of a theme when we get to that one. That'll be after the break, so you can look forward to that. But yes, not normal behaviour for rooms. Rooms not traditionally known for whistling. This one, however, mysterious. It whistles. Well, what's the deal with that? Let's discover and find out. See, so my slight reservations for this one are the story features a character who has moved to Ireland from America, and bought a castle. This isn't spoilers. This is just the opening setup. Bought a castle there and has been wooing the local lady that all the lads fancy, and believes that the supernatural hauntings going on in his house may be the local Irishman playing pranks on him. And it doesn't exactly feel to me like it goes over into full-blown anti-Irish racism of the time, but there's a little bit sort of that makes me uncomfortable with just referring to them as the Irishman. Anyone who's not one of these characters that we're kind of addressing as primary characters is just the Irishman, and that sort of broad strokes, put a big ring round them generalizations always make me a little bit uncomfortable, especially when it is a group who either present day or at the time were treated pretty badly, famously so. So yeah, I sort of had a couple of hesitations about that, but I figure we'd just stick a lampshade on it from the start and bring that to your attention. I'm hoping that we can sort of get through it without making anyone uncomfortable, but yeah. And your hand bench, that's true, your house makes cursed kazoo noises in the wind. Ooh, that's always a fun one. I used to remember that at school when when the wind got up in the hallway, that the doors would sort of reverberate and make some fun sounds there. That was always good. I see. I just why do I have another at? It's Dave's server letting me know that we're live. Sick. Thanks, Pigeon. Good job. That's what owls say. Probably shouldn't even say this, but the connection should be better for you here, so hopefully you won't miss as much as last time. Ah, nice. Okay. Yeah, you've jinxed it now. You've cursed it. Do I have anything else to say? Oh yeah. Well, of course we have book week next week. Important week. That's gonna be good. We have D&D tomorrow, obviously on Dave's channel, and then Lucy and myself launch into a week of streams of reading and other bits, where on Monday we'll be talking about things, probably preambling the rest of the weeks to come up. Week, yeah, we still don't have a good name for it, so I'm just calling it Book Week working title. Good night, Erin. Thank you for being here again. Lovely to see you. Nice spelling, Lucy. Good job. Yeah, sleep well. Be well. What was it? Yes, Book Week next week. So on Monday, we will be talking to you and then planning to talk over some games. And the current plan is something a little different, not a continuation of Scarlet Hollow. We have... So I guess on a week that's probably intended as a little bit of a channel outreach. Oh, we're doing a thing. Tell your friends. Bring them over. Obviously, we're going to plan to go off script and do some weird and different stuff. But yes, we are possibly, might be considering for Monday a different game that Lucy and I both love and have played before, but is very good and doesn't actually require us to narrate things because it's all voice acted and very, very funny. But yes, we may do that. We might do that. I have it downloaded and just need to set it up and check that it's ready and working. So maybe that. Who knows? Not even us, because we're like that and difficult. Then Tuesday, you will have myself talking what Lucy's helpfully called Sam Discusses Sci-Fi. And I'm some kind of academic. No, I'm a guy who's read some like golden age sci-fi and took an interest in it. Took an interest in it, and has read more since. And recently, I've been enjoying the works of the author Quantum, QNTM, and the stuff that they write. And so, really, what we're going to be doing on Monday is reading some bits from that, with some, but not getting into the whole book, just like the first chapter and change of There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, and some short stories, and sort of see where we go from there. Probably have a bit of a discuss about sci-fi, but it's not like I've got a talk planned or anything about here is the history of science fiction and where it began and where it is now. None of that. We're just going to be reading someone talking about it, really. I hope that's cool. That's Tuesday. Yep, correct. That's Tuesday. Wednesday, Lucy will be continuing A Tale of Two Cities with Part 5. Thursday, I will be rereading some old stories. I mean, they're all old stories. They're all old stories, Bront. But these are specifically old stories that we have read here on the channel previously, ideally, from the first year or two, year and a half. I was actually looking back and saw that kind of in the first year we just read a lot of longer stuff and didn't really get onto the short stories until we were into it a bit. So, who knows? I'm still soliciting suggestions for that. Otherwise, I'll just probably scroll back through the YouTube like tomorrow or Monday and pick some. That is Thursday. We'll be doing that. Just to reread some classics, revisit the good stuff. Friday, Lucy will be discussing comedy, which will be reading you some Woodhouse, I believe, is the plan, because she loves her some P.G. Woodhouse. A bit of cheese and Worcester for your ears. And then Saturday, I forget what we said we were doing. On Saturday will be me. Saturday will just be me with short stories. That's the thing that I do on Saturday, like today. Today is Saturday. Hi. So I'll need to find some short stories for that. It might be our last visit to William Hope Hodgson. Who knows? There's a couple more stories in the book that I think I can get through. So we might do that next Saturday. And then Sunday we should be finishing it out with an earlier stream at like 3 p.m. our time. Doing some plays and poems. We have not decided what plays and poems yet, although we have had a lot of suggestions and submissions. So that's on us to actually put aside some time this week to sift through those and pick out some ones that we like. But yeah, it feels like we're prepping for a marathon, and to be honest, it's probably going to be a bit of a marathon. We're both going to be shattered by the end of the week, but yeah, it should be fun. It should be a good week. I'm looking forward to starting it. Yeah, I hope you are too. The entirety of Hamlet. Yes, we will just do that on Sunday. Yeah. We'll see. I'll consider it. No. So, let's pick up a story now, because that's what we do. Yeah, this first story that I'm going to read... Are you okay there, Thunder? So it's a bit relevant. You're super excited, and this is where you feel safe and celebrating. You finally managed to tie the scarf over your hair in a way that it doesn't fall off. You've been trying most of the evening? Hell yeah. Congratulations. Well done. Can I get some pog jumps in chat for Thunder? That would be great. Right. I've got a story. I'm going to read it to you. This is... If we're sitting comfortably, of course, I'm assuming that. So this is a brief warning. If you come here for a story, then that's what you're going to get. If you are seated comfortably and have yourselves a relaxing drink of some kind, the ambient is being set by the rain at the pixelated window, and I'm imagine me sat in a large, soft, green, comfy chair. It's not leather. Leather would be noisy. It's just green fabric. And Joey's cat and drink at the ready. Cat stealing the drink. Joey's going to appear at the door in like 2 minutes. Just you wait and see. I am stealing your intro. If we are ready with some kind of comfy seat and a beverage, then I shall begin. No, I'm going to wait for your reaction to that. There we go. Right. Anyway, enough goofing. This is, for the third or fourth time, The Whistling Room by William Hope Hodgson. Kanaki shook a friendly fist at me as I entered late. Then he opened the door into the dining room and ushered the four of us, Jessup, Arkwright, Taylor, and myself, in to dinner. We dined well, as usual, and equally as usual, Kanaki was pretty silent during the meal. At the end, we took our wine and cigars to our accustomed positions, and Kanaki, having got himself comfortable in his big chair, began without any preliminary. "I've just got back from Ireland again," he said, "and I thought you chaps would be interested to hear my news. Besides, I fancy I shall see the thing clearer after I have told it all straight. I must tell you this, though, at the beginning. Up to the present moment I have been utterly and completely stumped. I have tumbled upon one of the most peculiar cases of haunting, or devilment of some sort, that I have come against. Now listen." I also realise I forgot to link a text to this in chat. I don't know if anyone will be able to find it, but if you can, please feel free to do so. I have been spending the last few weeks at Yastre Castle, about 20 miles northeast of Galway. I got a letter about a month ago from a Mr. Sid K. Tassock, who it seemed had bought the place lately and moved in, only to find he had got a very peculiar piece of property. When I reached there, he met me at the station, driving a jaunting car, and drove me up to the castle, which, by the way, he called a house shanty. I found that he was pigging it there with his boy brother and another American, who seemed to be half servant and half companion. It appears that all the servants had left the place in a body, as you might say, and now they were managing among themselves, assisted by some day help. The three of them got together a scratch feed, and Tassock told me all about the trouble whilst we were at table. It is most extraordinary and different from anything that I have had to do with, though that buzzing case was very queer too. Tassock began right in the middle of his story. "We've got a room in this shanty," he said, "which has got a most fearful whistling in it, sort of haunting it. The thing starts any time, you never know when, and it goes on until it frightens you. All the servants have gone, as I've told you. It's not ordinary whistling, and it isn't the wind. Wait till you hear it." "We're all carrying guns," said the boy, and slapped his coat pocket. "As bad as that?" I said, and the older brother nodded. "I may be soft," he replied, "but wait till you've heard it. Sometimes I think it's some infernal thing, and the next moment I'm just as sure that someone's playing a trick on us." "Why?" I asked. "What is to be gained?" "You mean," he said, "that people will usually have some good reason for playing tricks as elaborate as this? Well, I'll tell you. There's a lady in the province by the name of Miss Donahue who's going to be my wife this day 2 months. She's more beautiful than they make them, so far as I can see. I've just stuck my head into an Irish hornet's nest. There's about a score of hot young Irishmen been courting her these 2 years gone, and now that I've come along and cut them out, they feel raw against me. Do you begin to understand the possibilities?" "Yes," I said. "Perhaps I do in a vague sort of way, but I don't see how all this affects the room." "Like this," he said. "When I'd fixed it up with Miss Donahue, I looked out for a place and bought this little house shanty. Afterwards I told her, one evening during dinner, that I'd decided to tie up here, and then she asked me whether I wasn't afraid of the Whistling Room. I told her it must have been thrown in gratis, as I'd heard nothing about it. There were some of her men friends present, and I saw a smile go round. I found out, after a bit of questioning, that several people have bought this place during the last 20-odd years, and it was always on the market again after a trial. Well, the chap started to bait me a bit, and offered to take bets after dinner that I'd not stay 6 months in this shanty. I looked once or twice to Miss Donahue so as to be sure I was getting the note of the talkie-talkie, but I couldn't see that she didn't take it as a joke at all. But I could see that she didn't take it as a joke at all. Partly, I think, there was a bit of a sneer in the way the men were tackling me, and partly because she really believes there was something in this yarn of the whistling room. However, after dinner I did what I could to even things up with the others. I nailed all their bets and screwed them down good and safe. I guess some of them are going to be hard hit, unless I lose, which I don't mean to. Well, there you have practically the whole yarn. Not quite, I told him. All that I know is that you have bought a castle with a room in it that is in some way queer, and that you've been doing some betting. Also, I know that your servants have got frightened and run away. Tell me something about the whistling. Oh, that, said Tassoc. That started the second night we were in. I'd had a good look round the room in the daytime, as you can understand, for the talk up at Arlestray, Miss Donahue's place, had made me wonder a bit. But it seems just as usual as some of the other rooms in the old wing, only perhaps a bit more lonesome feeling. But that may be only because of the talk about it. But that may be only because of the talk about it, you know. The whistling started about 10 o'clock on the second night, as I said. Tom and I were in the library when we heard an awfully queer whistling coming from the east corridor. The room is in the east wing, you know. That's the blessed ghost, I said to Tom, and we collared the lamps off the table and went up to have a look. I tell you, even as we dug along the corridor, it took me a bit in the throat. It was so beastly queer. It was a sort of tune, in a way, but more as if a devil or some rotten thing were laughing at you and going to get round at your back. That's how it makes you feel. When we got to the door, we didn't wait, but rushed it open, and then I tell you, the sound of the thing fairly hit me in the face. Tom said he got it the same way. Sort of felt stunned and bewildered. We looked all round and soon got so nervous we just cleared out, and I locked the door. We came down here and had a stiff peg each. Then we landed fit again and began to feel we'd been nicely had. So we took sticks and went out into the grounds, thinking, after all, it must be some of these confounded Irishmen working the ghost trick on us. But there was not a leg stirring. We went back into the house and walked over it, and then paid another visit to the room. But we simply couldn't stand it. We fairly ran out and locked the door again. I don't know how to put it into words, but I had a feeling of being up against something that was rottenly dangerous. You know, we've carried our guns ever since. Of course, we had a real turnout in the room the next day, and the whole house place, and we even hunted round the grounds, but there was nothing queer. And now I don't know what to think, except that the sensible part of me tells me that it's some plan of these wild Irishmen to try and take a rise out of me. Done anything since? I asked him. Yes, he said. Watched outside of the door of the room at nights and chased round the grounds and sounded the walls and floor of the room. We've done everything we could think of, and it's beginning to get on our nerves, so we sent for you. By this, we had finished eating, and as we rose from the table, Tassoc suddenly called out, "Shh! Hark!" We were instantly silent, listening. Then I heard it, an extraordinary hooning whistle, monstrous and inhuman, coming from far away through the corridors to my right. "By God!" said Tassoc, "and it's scarcely dark yet. Collar those candles, both of you, and come along." In a few moments we were all out of the door and racing up the stairs. Tassoc turned into a long corridor, and we followed, shielding our candles as we ran. The sound seemed to fill all the passage as we drew near, until I had the feeling that the whole air throbbed under the power of some wanton immense force, a sense of an actual taint, as you might say, of monstrosity all about us. Tassoc unlocked the door, then, giving it a push with his foot, jumped back and drew his revolver. As the door flew open, the sound beat out at us with an effect impossible to explain to one who has not heard it, with a certain horrible personal note in it, as if there, in the darkness, you could picture the room rocking and creaking in a mad, vile glee to its own filthy piping and whistling and hooning, and yet all the time aware of you in particular. To stand there and listen was to be stunned by realization. It was as if someone showed you the mouth of a vast pit suddenly and said, "That's hell." and you knew that they had spoken the truth. Do you get it, even a little bit? I stepped a pace into the room and held the candle over my head and looked quickly round. Tassoc and his brother joined me, and the man came up at the back, and we all held our candles high. I was deafened with the shrill, piping hoon of the whistling, and then, clear in my ear, something seemed to be saying to me, "Get out of here! Quick! Quick! Quick!" As you chaps know, I never neglect that sort of thing. Sometimes it may be nothing but nerves, but as you will remember, it was the case of such a warning that saved me in the grey dog case, and in the yellow finger experiments, as well as other times. Well, I turned sharp round to the others. "Out!" I said. "For God's sake, out! Quick!" And in an instant I had them into the passage. There came an extraordinary yelling scream into the hideous whistling, and then, like a clap of thunder, an utter silence. I slammed the door and locked it. Then, taking the key, I looked round at the others. They were pretty white, and I imagine I must have looked that way too, and there we stood a moment, silent. "Come down out of this and have some whiskey," said Tassoc at last, in a voice he tried to make ordinary, and he led the way. I was the back man, and I knew we all kept looking over our shoulders. When we got downstairs, Tassoc passed the bottle round. He took a drink himself and slapped his glass onto the table, then sat down with a thud. "That's a lovely thing to have in the house with you, isn't it?" he said, and directly afterwards, "What on earth made you hustle us all out like that, Carnacki?" "Something seemed to be telling me to get out, quick," I said. "Sounds a bit silly, superstitious, I know, but when you are meddling with this sort of thing, you've got to take notice of queer fancies and risk being laughed at." I told him about the grey dog business, and he nodded a lot to that. "Of course," I said, "this may be nothing more than those would-be rivals of yours playing some funny game. But personally, though, I'm going to keep an open mind. I feel that there is something beastly and dangerous about this thing." We talked for a while longer, and then Tassoc suggested billiards, which we played in a pretty half-hearted fashion, and all the time cocking an ear to the door, as you might say, for sounds. But none came, and later, after coffee, he suggested early bed and a thorough overhaul of the room on the morrow. My bedroom was in the newer part of the castle, and the door opened into the picture gallery. At the east end of the gallery was the entrance to the corridor of the east wing. This was shut off from the gallery by two old and heavy oak doors, which looked rather odd and quaint beside the more modern doors of the various rooms. When I reached my room, I did not go to bed, but began to unpack my instrument trunk, of which I had retained the key. I intended to take 1 or 2 preliminary steps at once in my investigation of the extraordinary whistling. Presently, when the castle had settled into quietness, I slipped out of my room and across to the entrance of the great corridor. I opened one of the low, squat doors and threw the beam of my pocket searchlight down the passage. It was empty, and I went through the doorway and pushed to the oak behind me. Then along the great passageway, throwing my light before and behind and keeping my revolver handy. I had hung a protection belt of garlic round my neck, and the smell of it seems to fill the corridor and gave me assurance. For, as you all know, it is a wonderful protection against the more usual airy forms of the semi-materialization, by which I suppose the whistling might be produced. Though, at that period of my investigation, I was still quite prepared to find it due to some perfectly natural case. For it is astonishing the enormous number of cases that prove to have nothing abnormal in them. In addition to wearing the necklet, I had plugged my ears loosely with garlic, and, as I did not intend to stay more than a few minutes in the room, I hoped to be safe. When I reached the door and put my hand into my pocket for the key, I had a sudden feeling of sickening funk. But I was not going to back out if I could help it. I unlocked the door and turned the handle. Then I gave the door a sharp push with my foot, as Tassoc had done, and drew my revolver, though I did not expect to have any use for it, really. I shone the searchlight all round the room, and then stepped inside, with a disgustingly horrible feeling of walking slap into awaiting danger. I stood a few seconds, expectant, and nothing happened, and the empty room showed bare from corner to corner. And then, I realized that the room was full of an abominable silence. Can you understand that? A sort of purposeful silence, just as sickening as any of the filthy noises the things have power to make. Do you remember what I told you about the silent garden business? Well, this room had just that same malevolent silence, the beastly quietness of a thing that is looking at you and not seeable itself and thinks that it has got you. Oh, I recognized it instantly, and I whipped the top off my lantern so as to have light over the whole room. Then I set to, working like fury and keeping my glance all about me. I sealed the 2 windows with lengths of human hair right across and sealed them at every frame. As I worked, a queer, scarcely perceptible tenseness stole into the air of the place, and the silence seemed, if you can understand me, to grow more solid. I knew then that I had no business there without full protection, for I was practically certain that this was no mere eerie development, but one of the worst forms, as the Sati, like that grunting man case, I finished the window and hurried over to the great fireplace. This is a huge affair and has a queer gallows iron, I think they are called, projecting from the back of the arch. I sealed the opening with 7 human hairs, the 7th crossing the 6 others. Then, just as I was making an end, a low, mocking whistle grew in the room. A cold, nervous prickling went up my spine and round my forehead from the back. The hideous sound filled all the room with an extraordinary, grotesque parody of human whistling, too gigantic to be human, as if something gargantuan and monstrous made the sounds softly. As I stood there, a last moment, pressing down the final seal, I had little doubt but that I had come across one of those rare and horrible cases of the inanimate reproducing the functions of the animate. I made a grab for my lamp and went quickly to the door, looking over my shoulder and listening for the thing that I expected. It came, just as I got my hand upon the handle, a squeal of incredible, malevolent anger piercing through the low hooning of the whistling. I dashed out, slamming the door and locking it. I leant a little against the opposite wall of the corridor, feeling rather funny, for it had been a hideously narrow squeak. There be no safety to be gained by guards of holiness when the monster hath power to speak through wood and stone. So runs the passage in the 6th missive, and I proved it in that nodding door business. There is no protection against this particular form of monster, except possibly for a fractional period of time, for it can reproduce itself in, or take to its purposes, the very protective material which you may use, and has power to form within the pentacle, though not immediately. There is, of course, the possibility of the unknown last line of the Sama ritual being uttered, but it is too uncertain to count upon, and the danger is too hideous, and even then it has no power to protect for more than maybe 5 beats of the heart, as the 6th has it. Inside of the room there was now a constant, meditative hooning, whistling, but presently this ceased, and the silence seemed worse, for there is such a sense of hidden mischief in the silence. After a little, I sealed the door with crossed hairs, and then cleared off down the great passage, and so to bed. For a long time I lay awake, but managed eventually to get some sleep. Yet, about 2 o'clock I was waked by the hooning whistling of the room coming to me, even through the closed doors. The sound was tremendous, and seemed to beat through the whole house with a presiding sense of terror, as if, I remember thinking, some monstrous giant had been holding mad carnival with itself at the end of the great passage. I got up and sat on the edge of the bed, wondering whether to go along and have a look at the seal. And suddenly there came a thump on my door, and Tassoc walked in with his dressing gown over his pyjamas. "I thought it would await you, so I came along to have a talk," he said. "I can't sleep. Beautiful, isn't it? "Extraordinary," I said, and tossed him my case. He lit a cigarette, and we sat and talked for about an hour, and all the time that noise went on down at the end of the big corridor. Suddenly Tassoc stood up. "Let's take our guns and go and examine the brute," he said, and turned towards the door. "No," I said. "By Jove, no! I can't say anything definite yet, but I believe that room is about as dangerous as it well can be." "Haunted? Really haunted?" he asked, keenly and without any of his frequent banter. I told him, of course, that I could not say a definite yes or no to such a question, but that I hoped to be able to make a statement soon. Then I gave him a little lecture about the false rematerialization of the animate force through the inanimate inert. He began then to understand the particular way in which the room might be dangerous, if it were really the subject of a manifestation. About an hour later, the whistling ceased quite suddenly, and Tassoc went off to bed again. I went back to mine also, and eventually got another spell of sleep. In the morning, I walked along to the room. I found the seals on the door intact. Then I went in. The window seals and the hair were all right, but the 7th hair across the great fireplace was broken. This set me thinking. I knew that it might very possibly have snapped through my having tensioned it too highly, but then again it might have been broken by something else. Yet it was scarcely possible that a man, for instance, could have passed between the 6 unbroken hairs, for no one would ever have noticed them entering the room that way, you see, but just walked through them ignorant of their very existence. I removed the other hairs and the seals. Then I looked up the chimney. It went up straight, and I could see the blue sky at the top. It was a big, open flue, and free from any suggestion of hiding places or corners. Yet, of course, I did not trust any such casual examination, and after breakfast I put on my overalls and climbed to the very top, sounding all the way. But I found nothing. Then I came down and went over the whole of the room, floor, ceiling, and walls, mapping them out in 6-inch squares, and sounding with both hammer and probe, but there was nothing unusual. Afterwards, I made a 3-week search of the whole castle in the same thorough way, but found nothing. I even went further then, for at night, when the whistling commenced, I made a microphone test. You see, if the whistling were mechanically produced, this test would have made evident to me the working of the machinery, if there were any such concealed within the walls. It certainly was an up-to-date method of examination, as you must allow. Of course, I did not think that any of Tassoc's rivals had fixed up any mechanical contrivance, but I thought it just possible that there had been some such thing for producing the whistling made away back in the years, perhaps with the intention of giving the room a reputation that would ensure its being free of inquisitive folk. You see what I mean? Well, of course it was just possible, if this were the case, that someone knew the secrecy of the machinery and was utilizing the knowledge to play this devil of a prank on Tassoc. The microphone test of the walls would certainly have made this known to me, as I have said. But there was nothing of the sort in the castle, so that I had practically no doubt at all now, but that it was a genuine case of what is popularly termed haunting. All this time, every night, and sometimes most of each night, the hooning whistling of the room was intolerable. It was as if an intelligence there knew that steps were being taken against it, and piped and hooned in a sort of mad, mocking contempt. I tell you, it was extraordinary as it was horrible. It was as extraordinary as it was horrible. Time after time I went along, tiptoeing noiselessly on stockinged feet, to the sealed door, for I always kept the room sealed. I went at all hours of the night, and often the whistling inside would seem to change to a brutally jeering note, as though the half-animate monster saw me plainly through the shut door. And all the time, as I would stand, watching, the hooning of the whistling would seem to fill the whole corridor, so that I used to feel a precious lonely chap messing about there with one of hell's mysteries. And every morning I would enter the room and examine the different hairs and seals. You see, after the first week I had stretched parallel hairs all along the walls of the room and along the ceiling, but over the floor, which was of polished stone, I had set out little colourless wafers, tacky side uppermost. Each wafer was numbered, and they were arranged after a definite plan so that I should be able to trace the exact movements of any living thing that went across. You will see that no material being or creature could possibly have entered that room without leaving many signs to tell me about it. But nothing was ever disturbed, and I began to think that I should have to risk an attempt to stay a night in the room in the electric pentacle. Mind you, I knew that it would be a crazy thing to do, but I was getting stumped and ready to try anything. Once, about midnight, I did break the seal on the door and have a quick look in. But I tell you, the whole room gave one mad yell and seemed to come towards me in a great belly of shadows, as if the walls had bellied in towards me. Of course, that must have been fancy. Anyway, the yell was sufficient, and I slammed the door and locked it, feeling a bit weak down my spine. I wonder whether you know the feeling. And then, when I had got to that state of readiness for anything, I made what, at first, I thought was something of a discovery. It was about 1 in the morning, and I was walking slowly round the castle, keeping in the soft grass. I had come under the window of the east front, and far above me I could hear the vile hooning whistling of the room up in the darkness of the unlit wing. Then, suddenly, a little in front of me, I heard a man's voice, speaking low, but evidently in glee. "By George, ye chaps, but I wouldn't care to bring a wife home to that," it said in the tone of the cultured Irish. Someone started to reply, but there came a sharp exclamation and then a rush, and I heard footsteps running in all directions. Evidently the men had spotted me. For a few seconds I stood there, feeling an awful ass. After all, they were at the bottom of the haunting. Do you see what a big fool it made me seem? I had no doubt but that they were some of Tassock's rivals, and here I had been feeling in every bone that I had hit a genuine case. And then, you know, there came the memory of hundreds of details that made me just as much in doubt again. Anyway, whether it was natural or abnatural, there was a great deal yet to be cleared up. I told Tassock next morning what I had discovered, and through the whole of every night for 5 nights we kept a close watch round the east wing, but there was never a sign of anyone prowling about, and all the time, almost from evening to dawn, that grotesque whistling would hoon incredibly far above us in the darkness. On the morning after the 5th night, I received a wire from here which brought me home by the next boat. I explained to Tassock that I was simply bound to come away for a few days, but told him to keep up the watch round the castle. One thing I was very careful to do, and that was to make him absolutely promise never to go into the room between sunset and sunrise. I made it clear to him that we knew nothing definite yet, one way or the other, and if the room were what I had first thought it to be, it might be a lot better for him to die first than enter it after dark. When I got here and had finished my business, I thought you chaps would be interested, and also I wanted to get it all spread out, clear in my mind, so I rang you up. I am going over again tomorrow, and when I get back I ought to have something pretty extraordinary to tell you. By the way, there is a curious thing I forgot to tell you. I tried to get a phonographic record of the whistling, but it simply produced no impression on the wax at all. That is one of the things that has made me feel queer. Another extraordinary thing is that the microphone will not magnify the sound. It will not even transmit it. Seems to take no account of it and acts as if it were non-existent. I am absolutely and utterly stumped up to the present. I am a wee bit curious to see whether any of your dear clever heads can make daylight of it. I cannot. Not yet. He rose to his feet. "Good night, all," he said, and began to usher us out abruptly, but without offence, into the night. A fortnight later, He dropped us each a card, and you can imagine that I was not late this time. When we arrived, Kanaki took us straight into dinner, and when we had finished, we all made ourselves comfortable. He began again where he had left off. Now just listen quietly, for I have got something very queer to tell you. I got back late at night, and I had to walk up to the castle, as I had not warned them that I was coming. 1 second, Joey is letting me know that he would like to come in. He is about to introduce himself. There you go. Talking to the microphone. Right, let's take it back. Now, just listen quietly, for I have got something very queer to tell you. I got back late at night, and I had to walk up to the castle, as I had not warned that I was coming. It was bright moonlight, so that the walk was rather a pleasure than otherwise. When I got there, the whole place was in darkness, and I thought I would go round outside to see whether Tassoc or his brother was keeping watch, but I could not find them anywhere, and concluded that they had got tired of it and gone off to bed. As I returned across the lawn, just checking I did unmute my mic. I did, good. As I returned across the lawn that lies below the front of the east wing, I caught the hooning whistling of the room coming down strangely clear through the stillness of the night. It had a peculiar note in it, I remember, low and constant, queerly meditative. I looked up at the window, bright in the moonlight, and got a sudden thought to bring a ladder from the stable yard, and to try to get a look into the room from the outside. With this notion I hunted round at the back of the castle, among the straggle of offices, and presently found a long, fairly light ladder, though it was heavy enough for one, goodness knows. You want to sniff the microphone? It's just a mic. I thought at first that I should never get it reared. I managed at last, and let the ends rest very quietly against the wall, a little below the sill of the larger window. Then, going silently, I went up the ladder. Presently I had my face above the sill, and was looking in, alone with the moonlight. Of course, the queer whistling sounded louder up there, but it still conveyed that peculiar sense of something whistling quietly to itself. Can you understand? Though, for all the meditative lowness of the note, the horrible gargantuan quality was distinct, a mighty parody of the human, as if I stood there and listened to the whistling from the lips of a monster with a man's soul. And then, I saw something. The floor in the middle of the huge empty room was puckered upwards in the centre into a strange, soft-looking mound, parted at the top into an ever-changing hole that pulsated to that great gentle hooning. At times, as I watched, I saw the heaving of the indented mound gap across with a queer inward suction, as with the drawing of an enormous breath, and the thing would dilate and pout once more to the incredible melody. And suddenly, as I stared, dumb, it came to me that the thing was living. I was looking at two enormous blackened lips, blistered and brutal, there in the pale moonlight. Abruptly they bulged out to a vast pouting mound of force and sound, stiffened and swollen and hugely massive and clean-cut in the moonbeams. And the great sweat lay heavy on the vast upper lip. In the same moment of time the whistling had burst into a mad screaming note that seemed to stun me even where I stood outside of the window. And then, the following moment, I was staring blankly at the solid, undisturbed floor of the room. Smooth, polished stone flooring from wall to wall, and there was an absolute silence. You can picture me staring into the quiet room and knowing what I felt. I felt like a sick, frightened child, and I wanted to slide quietly down the ladder and run away. But in that very instant I heard Tassoc's voice calling to me from within the room for help! Help! My God, but I got such an awful dazed feeling, and I had a vague, bewildered notion that, after all, it was the Irishman who had got him in there, and were taking it out of him. And then the call came again, and I burst the window and jumped in to help him. I had a confused idea that the call had come from within the shadow of the great fireplace, and I raced across to it. But there was no one there. "Tussock!" I shouted, and my voice went empty-sounding round the great apartment. And then, in a flash, I knew that Tussock had never called. I whirled round, sick with fear, towards the window, and as I did so a frightful, exultant whistling scream burst through the room. On my left, the end wall had bellied in towards me in a pair of gargantuan lips, black and utterly monstrous, to within a yard of my face. I fumbled for a mad instant at my revolver. Not for it, but myself. Not for it, but myself, for the danger was 1,000 times worse than death. And then, suddenly, the unknown last line of the Samar ritual was whispered quite audibly in the room. Instantly, the thing happened that I have known once before. There came a sense as of dust falling continually and monotonously, and I knew that my life hung uncertain and suspended for a flash, in a brief, reeling vertigo of unseeable things. Then that ended, and I knew that I might live. My soul and body blended again, and life and power came to me. I dashed furiously at the window and hurled myself out head foremost, for I can tell you that I had stopped being afraid of death. I crashed down onto the ladder and slithered, grabbing, and so came some way or other alive to the bottom. And there I sat in the soft, wet grass, with the moonlight all about me, and far above, through the broken window of the room, there was a low whistling. That is the chief of it. I was not hurt, and I went round to the front and knocked Tussock up. When they let me in, we had a long yarn over some good whisky, for I was shaken to pieces, and I explained things as much as I could. I told Tussock that the room would have to come down and every fragment of it be burned in a blast furnace erected within a pentacle. He nodded. There was nothing to say. Then I went to bed. We turned a small army onto the work, and within 10 days that lovely thing had gone up in smoke, and what was left was calcined and cleaned. It was when the workmen were stripping the panelling that I got hold of a sound notion of the beginnings of that beastly development. Over the great fireplace, after the great oak panels had been torn down, I found that there was let into the masonry a scrollwork of stone, with on it an old inscription, in ancient Celtic, and here, in this room, was burned Dian Tianse, jester of King Olzof, who made the Song of Foolishness upon King Ernor of the 7th Castle. When I got the translation clear, I gave it to Tussock. He was tremendously excited, for he knew the old tale, and took me down to the library to look at an old parchment that gave the story in detail. Afterwards, I found that the incident was well known about the countryside, but always regarded more as a legend than as history, and no one seemed ever to have dreamt that the old east wing of Yastre Castle was the remains of the ancient 7th Castle. From the old parchment I gathered that there had been a pretty dirty job done away back in the years. Excuse me one sec. It seems that King Olzof and King Ernor had been enemies by birthright, as you might say truly, but that nothing more than a little raiding had occurred on either side for years, until Dian Tianse made the Song of Foolishness upon King Ernor, and sang it before King Olzof, and so greatly was it appreciated that King Olzof gave the jester one of his ladies to wife. Presently, all the people of the land had come to know the song, and so it came at last to King Ernor, who was so angered that he made war upon his old enemy, and took and burned him and his castle. But Dian Tianse, the jester, he brought with him to his own place, and having torn his tongue out because of the song which he had made and sung, he imprisoned him in the room in the east wing, which was evidently used for unpleasant purposes, and the jester's wife he kept for himself, having a fancy for her prettiness. But one night Dian Tianse's wife was not to be found, and in the morning they discovered her lying dead in her husband's arms, and he sitting, whistling the song of foolishness, for he had no longer the power to sing it. Then they roasted Dian Tianse in the great fireplace, probably from that self-same gallows iron which I had already mentioned, and until he died, Dian Tianse ceased not to whistle the song of foolishness, which he could no longer sing. But afterwards, in that room, there was often heard at night the sound of something whistling, and there grew a power in that room, so that none dared to sleep in it. And presently, it would seem, the king went to another castle, for the whistling troubled him. There you have it all. Of course, that is only a rough rendering of the translation from the parchment. It's a bit quaint. Don't you think so? Yes, I said, answering for the lot. But how did the thing grow to such a tremendous manifestation? One of those cases of continuity of thought reproducing a positive action upon the immediate surrounding material, replied Carnacki. The development must have been going forward through centuries to have produced such a monstrosity. It was a true instance of Sati manifestation, which I can best explain by likening it to a living spiritual fungus, which involves the very structure of the aether fibre itself, and, of course, in so doing, acquires an essential control over the material substance involved in it. It is impossible to make it plainer in a few words. What broke the seventh hair? Asked Taylor. But Carnacki did not know. He thought it was probably nothing but being too severely tensioned. He also explained that they found out that the men who had run away had not been up to mischief, but had come over secretly, merely to hear the whistling, which, indeed, had suddenly become the talk of the whole countryside. One other thing, said Arkwright. Have you any idea what governs the use of the unknown last line of the Samhain ritual? I know, of course, that it was used by the abhuman priests in the incantation of Re, but what used it on your behalf, and what made it? You had better read Harzam's monograph in the addenda to it, and my addenda to it, on astral and astral coordination and interference, said Carnacki. It is an extraordinary subject, and I can only say here that the human vibration may not be insulated from the astral, as is always believed to be the case in interferences by the abhuman, without immediate action being taken by those forces which govern the spinning of the outer circle. In other words, it is being proved time after time that there is some inscrutable protective force constantly intervening between the human soul, not the body, mind you, and the outer monstrosities. Am I clear? Yes, I think so, I replied. And you believe that the room had become the material expression of the ancient jester, that his soul rotted with hatred had bred into a monster, eh? I asked. Yes, said Carnacki, nodding. I think you've put my thought rather neatly. It is a queer coincidence that Miss Donahue is supposed to be descended, so I have heard, from the same King Ernor. It makes one think some rather curious thoughts, doesn't it? The marriage coming on, and the room waking to fresh life. If she had gone into that room ever... It had waited a long time. Sins of the fathers. Yes, I thought of that. They're to be married next week, and I am to be the best man, which is a thing I hate. And he won his bets, rather. Just think if she had ever gone into that room. Pretty horrible, eh? He nodded his head grimly, and we four nodded back. Then he rose and took us collectively to the door, and presently thrust us forth in a friendly fashion onto the embankment and into the fresh night air. Good night, we all called back and went to our various homes. If she had, eh? If she had. That is what I kept thinking. And that is the end of the story of the Whistling Room, and where we shall go to a break. So, you know what to do by now. rotate those fluids, stretch as much as you can, do what else you've got to do. You've got about 5 minutes and change probably to do it, and I will see you back here then. Bye for now. we're back. Hello, welcome back. I insist that you have had a good and successful break. No, I can't do that. I have no power to do that. But I hope that it has been a good and successful break, full of all the things you need. I realised that what I could do to help people would be to find a text for the next one that I'm going to be reading, which would be this thing, hopefully. The Thing in the Weeds. And I've realised that actually I got through that last one a little faster than I expected, so what I might even be able to do is read a third story. And perhaps you've acquired more root beer. Quite successful. Good. Excellent. Joey has curled up in his box in his sleep. I have barely moved. You fetched frozen strawberries. You think that counts success? Nice. Alright. Good. Because if I do the third one, I'm also just going to find that quickly. A secret third story. Yes, I'm trying to think actually if it's one that's. Lucy, you can tell me. Have we put up Out of the Storm anywhere on Bandcamp yet? Has it gone up there? I don't remember if it has, because I know I read it and it's quite a short one, so we were wondering where to fit it in. But yes, we may get onto Out of the Storm. I don't know. But yeah, you might get to hear it tonight, depending on how quickly I get started. But I will say, the comment that I made in chat over the break, I love that, like the Karnaki stories, he likes to have little details like, I meticulously glued and stretched all these little seals and hairs and stuff throughout the room at every point of entry to make sure that no one could get in, and I put these 6 out across the fireplace and then a 7th one across them that no man could possibly get through without disturbing them, and then the 7th one was broken but all the others were fine. Isn't that a weird mystery how something weird could have done that and broken the 7th one that was across the other 6 but not the other 6? It's kind of impossible for someone to do that. But, maybe, hey, it could have just broken of its own accord, whatever, and you get to the end and someone goes, yeah, what about that 7th hair? And Kanaki just has to go, I have no idea. Just broke. Anyway, on with the show. And it's, it kind of sounds a little bit like I'm being, sarcastic, but I'm not. I sort of like, it is a Mr. X, but I don't really think, because obviously you're dealing with supernatural stuff, so misdirecting the listener only goes so far when you can literally just go, oh yeah, and BT dubs, there's magic, because, magic can solve anything or cause anything. So, yeah, there's only, you, the listener, aren't going to hear that and go, ooh, well, I think that means this, because in this kind of context, the author can throw literally any kind of curveball at you that they can imagine, and you just have to go, yeah, I guess. And that gets us onto the subject of suspension of disbelief, which is a whole thing, and narrative consistency and all that. But yeah, I don't know, I just find it entertaining that it's like, we have this extensive detail that, no idea, it just happened. Or the little post-it notes all over the floor. And no one touched them. No idea is a good enough conclusion, really. Exactly. That genuinely, I think, is a point that more people, I think, including myself as well, need to get used to, that sometimes not having an answer is also an answer. Looks at the end of Inception and the reaction to that of, oh, what's the secret, hidden, real, mystery, secret, real, true, A+, special bonus, dogs controlling everything ending to this film. No. Sometimes an open ending is the conclusion. And we need to be better about that. And yeah, just sometimes there aren't answers to things, and that's okay too. Sorry if I've just spoiled Inception to you, but really that's on you for not having watched it yet. Anyway, shall we read another story, which in this case is called The Thing in the Weeds? And as I said at the top of the show, see if you can spot any kind of, I don't know, familiar theme. You may feel like you've heard this story before. You've not, but you might feel that way. You watched Inception some months ago and barely remember anything. I believe you, but also it sounds like you're doing a bit. Good job. Anyway, I am going to read you a story. It is called The Thing in the Weeds. It was written by William Hope Hodgson, and it starts now. This is an extraordinary tale. We had come up from the Cape, and, owing to the trades heading us more than usual, we had made some hundreds of miles more westing than I ever did before or since. I remember the particular night of the happening perfectly. I suppose what occurred stamped it solid into my memory with 1,000 little details that, in the ordinary way, I should never have remembered an hour. And of course, we talked it over so often among ourselves that this, no doubt, helped to fix it all past any forgetting. I remember the mate and I had been pacing the weather side of the poop and discussing various old shellback superstitions. I was third mate, and it was between 4 and 5 bells in the first watch, between 10 and half past. Suddenly, he stopped in his walk and lifted his head and sniffed several times. "My word, mister," he said, "there's a rum kind of stink somewhere about. Don't you smell it?" I sniffed once or twice at the light airs that were coming in on the beam. Then I walked to the rail and leaned over, smelling again at the slight breeze. And abruptly I got a whiff of it, faint and sickly, yet vaguely suggestive of something I had once smelt before. "I can smell something, Mr. Lammett," I said. I could almost give it a name, and yet somehow I can't. I stared away into the dark to windward. "What do you seem to smell?" I asked him. "I can't smell anything now," he replied, coming over to standing beside me. "It's gone again." "No. By Jove, there it is again. My goodness, woof." The smell was all about us now, filling the night air. It had still that indefinable familiarity about it, and yet it was curiously strange, and, more than anything else, it was certainly simply beastly. The stench grew stronger, and presently the mate asked me to go forward and see whether the lookout man noticed anything. When I reached the break of the forecastle head, I called up to the man to know whether he smelled anything. "Smell anything, sir?" he sang out. "Jumping larks, I should think I do. I'm fair poisoned by it." I ran up the weather steps and stood beside him. The smell was certainly very plain up there, and after savouring it for a few moments I asked him whether he thought it might be a dead whale. But he was very emphatic that this could not be the case, for, as he said, he had been nearly 15 years in whaling ships and knew the smell of a dead whale. "Like as you with the smell of bad whisky, sir," as he put it. "'Tain't no whale yon, but the Lord he knows what 'tis. I'm thinking it's Davy Jones come up for a breather." I stayed with him some minutes, staring out into the darkness, but could see nothing. For even had there been something big close to us, I doubt whether I could have seen it. So black a night it was, without a visible star, and with a vague, dull haze breeding an indistinctness all about the ship. I returned to the mate and reported that the lookout complained of the smell, but that neither he nor I had been able to see anything in the darkness to account for it. By this time, the queer, disgusting odour seemed to be in all the air about us, and the mate told me to go below and shut all the ports, so as to keep the beastly smell out of the cabins and the saloon. When I returned, he suggested that we should shut the companion doors, and after that we commenced to pace the poop again, discussing the extraordinary smell and stopping from time to time to stare through our night glasses out into the night about the ship. "I'll tell you what it smells like, mister," the mate remarked once. "And that's like a mighty old derelict I once went aboard in the North Atlantic. She was a proper old-timer, and she gave us all the creeps. There was just this funny, dank, rummy sort of smell about her, sort of century-old bilgewater and dead men and seaweed. Can't stop thinking we're nice and lonesome old packet out there, and a good thing we've not got much way on us." "Do you notice how almighty quiet everything's gone the last half hour or so?" I said, a little later. "It must be the mist thickening down." "It is the mist," said the mate, going to the rail and staring out. "Good Lord, what's that?" he added. Something had knocked his hat from his head, and it fell with a sharp rap at my feet. and suddenly, I got a premonition of something horrid. "Come away from the rail, sir," I said sharply, and gave one jump and caught him by the shoulders and dragged him back. "Come away from the side." "What's up, mister?" He growled at me and twisted his shoulders free. "What's wrong with you? What have you knocked off my cap?" He stooped and felt around for it, and as he did so I heard something unmistakably fiddling away at the rail which the mate had just left. "My God, sir," I said, "there's something here. Hark!" The mate stiffened up, listening. Then he heard it. It was, for all the world, as if something was feeling and rubbing the rail there in the darkness not 2 fathoms away from us. "Who's there?" said the mate, quickly. Then, as there was no answer, "What the devil's this hanky-panky? Who's playing the goat there?" He made a swift step through the darkness towards the rail, but I caught him by the elbow. "Don't go, mister," I said, hardly above a whisper. "It's not one of the men. Let me get a light." "Quick then," he said, and I turned and ran aft to the binnacle and snatched out the lighted lamp. As I did so, I heard the mate shout something out of the darkness in a strange voice. There came a sharp, loud, rattling sound, and then a crash, and immediately the mate roaring to me to hasten with the light. His voice changed even whilst he shouted, and gave out something that was nearer a scream than anything else. There came 2 loud, dull blows and an extraordinary gasping sound, and then, as I raced along the poop, there was a tremendous smashing of glass and an immediate silence. "Mr. Lammett!" I shouted. "Mr. Lammett!" And then I had reached the place where I had left the mate not 40 seconds before, but he was not there. "Mr. Lammett!" I shouted again, holding the light high over my head, and turned quickly to look behind me. As I did so, my foot glided on some slippery substance, and I went headlong to the deck, with a tremendous thud, smashing the lamp and putting out the light. I was on my feet again in an instant. I groped a moment for the lamp, and as I did so I heard the men singing out from the main deck, and the noise of their feet as they came running aft. I found the broken lamp and realized it was useless. Then I jumped for the companionway, and in half a minute I was back with the big saloon lamp glaring bright in my hands. I ran forward again, shielding the upper edge of the glass chimney from the draught of my running, and the blaze of the big lamp seemed to make the weather side of the poop as bright as day, except for the mist that gave something of a vagueness to things. Where I had left the mate, there was blood upon the deck, but nowhere any signs of the man himself. I ran to the weather rail and held the lamp to it. There was blood upon it, and the rail itself seemed to have been wrenched by some huge force. I put out my hand and found that I could shake it. Then I leaned outboard and held the lamp at arm's length, staring down over the ship's side. "Mr. Lammett!" I shouted into the night and the thick mist. "Mr. Lammett! Mr. Lammett!" But my voice seemed to go, lost and muffled and infinitely small, away into the billowy darkness. I heard the men snuffling and breathing, waiting to leeward of the poop. I whirled round to them, holding the lamp high. "We heard something, sir," said Tarpley, the leading seaman in our watch. "Is anything wrong, sir?" "The mate's gone," I said blankly. "We heard something, and I went for the binnacle lamp. Then he shouted, and I heard a sound of things smashing, and when I got back he'd gone clean." I turned and held the light out again over the unseen sea, and the men crowded round along the rail and stared, bewildered. "Blood, sir," said Tarpley, pointing. "There's something almighty queer out there." He waved a huge hand into the darkness. "That's what stinks." He never finished, for suddenly one of the men cried out something in a frightened voice. "Look out, sir! Look out, sir!" I saw, in one brief flash of sight, something come in with an infernal flicker of movement. And then, before I could form any notion of what I had seen, the lamp was dashed to pieces across the poop deck. In that instant my perceptions cleared, and I saw the incredible folly of what we were doing. For there we were, standing up against the blank, unknowable night, and out there in the darkness there surely lurked some thing of monstrousness, and we were at its mercy. I seemed to feel it hovering over us, so that I felt the sickening creep of goose-flesh all over me. "Stand back from the rail!" I shouted. "Stand back from the rail!" There was a rush of feet as the men obeyed in sudden apprehension of their danger, and I gave back with them. Even as I did so, I felt some invisible thing brush my shoulder, and an indescribable smell was in my nostrils from something that moved over me in the dark. "Down into the saloon, everyone!" I shouted. "Down with you all! Don't wait a moment!" There was a rush along the dark weather deck, and then the men went helter-skelter down the companion steps into the saloon, falling and cursing over one another in the darkness. I sang out to the man at the wheel to join them, and then I followed. I came upon the men huddled at the foot of the stairs and filling up the passage, all crowding each other in the darkness. The skipper's voice was filling the saloon, and he was demanding, in violent adjectives, the cause of so tremendous a noise. From the steward's berth there came also a voice, and the splutter of a match, and then the glow of a lamp in the saloon itself. I pushed my way through the men and found the captain in the saloon, in his sleeping gear, looking both drowsy and angry, though perhaps bewilderment topped every other feeling. He held his cabin lamp in his hand and shone the light over the huddle of men. I hurried to explain, and told him of the incredible disappearance of the mate, and of my conviction that some extraordinary thing was lurking near the ship out in the mist and the darkness. I mentioned the curious smell, and told how the mate had suggested that we had drifted down near some old-time sea-rotted derelict. And, you know, even as I put it into awkward words, my imagination began to awaken to horrible discomforts. 1,000 dreadful impossibilities of the sea became suddenly possible. The captain, Geraldine was his name, did not stop to dress, but ran back into his cabin and came out in a few minutes with a couple of revolvers and a handful of cartridges. The second mate had come running out of his cabin at the noise, and had listened intently to what I had to say. Now he jumped back into his berth and brought out his own lamp and a large Smith & Wesson, which was evidently ready loaded. Captain Geraldine pushed one of his revolvers into my hands with some of the cartridges, and we began hastily to load the weapons. Then the captain caught up his lamp and made for the stairway, ordering the men into the saloon out of his way. "Shall you want them, sir?" I asked. "No," he said. "It's no use their running any unnecessary risks." He threw a word over his shoulder. "Stay quiet here, men. If I want you, I'll give a shout. Then come spry." "Aye, aye, sir," said the watch in a chorus, and then I was following the captain up the stairs, with the second mate close behind. We came up through the companionway onto the silence of the deserted poop. The mist had thickened up, even during the brief time that I had been below, and there was not a breath of wind. The mist was so dense that it seemed to press in upon us, and the two lamps made a kind of luminous halo in the mist, which seemed to absorb their light in a most peculiar way. "Where was he?" the captain asked me almost in a whisper. "Where was he?" "On the port side, sir," I said. "A little foreside of the chart house and about a dozen feet in from the rail. I'll show you the exact place." We went forward along what had been the weather side, going quietly and watchfully, though, indeed, it was little enough that we could see because of the mist. Once, as I led the way, I thought I heard a vague sound somewhere in the mist, but was all unsure because of the slow creak of the spars and gear as the vessel rolled slightly upon an old, oily swell. Apart from this slight sound, and the far-up rustle of the canvas slatting gently against the masts, there was no sound at all throughout the ship. I assure you the silence seemed to me to be almost menacing in the tense, nervous state in which I was. "Hereabouts is where I left him," I whispered to the captain a few seconds later. "Hold your lamp low, sir. There's blood on the deck." Captain Geraldine did so, and made a slight sound with his mouth at what he saw. Then, heedless of my hurried warning, he walked across to the rail, holding his lamp high up. I followed him, for I could not let him go alone, and the second mate came too with his lamp. They leaned over the port rail and held their lamps out to the mist and the unknown darkness beyond the ship's side. I remember how the lamps made just 2 yellow glares in the mist, ineffectual, yet serving somehow to make extraordinarily plain the vastitude of the night and the possibilities of the dark. Perhaps that is a queer way to put it, but it gives you the effect of that moment upon my feelings. And all the time, you know, there was upon me the brutal, frightening expectancy of something reaching in at us from out of the everlasting darkness and mist that held all the sea and the night, so that we were just 3 mist-shrouded hidden figures, peering nervously. The mist was now so thick that we could not even see the surface of the water overside, and fore and after us the rail vanished away into the fog and the dark. And then, as we stood here staring, I heard something moving down on the main deck. I caught Captain Joldy by the elbow. "Come away from the rail, sir," I said, hardly above a whisper, and he, with the swift premonition of danger, stepped back and allowed me to urge him well inboard. The second mate followed, and the 3 of us stood there in the mist, staring round about us and holding our revolvers handy, and the dull waves of the mist beating in slowly upon the lamps in vague wreathings and swirls of fog. "What was it you heard, mister?" asked the captain after a few moments. "Sst," I muttered. "There it is again! There's something moving down on the main deck." Captain Joldy heard it himself now, and the 3 of us stood listening intensely. Yet it was hard to know what to make of the sounds. And then, suddenly, there was the rattle of a deck ring-bolt, and then again as if something or someone were fumbling and playing with it. "Down there, on the main deck!" shouted the captain abruptly, his voice seeming hoarse close to my ear, yet immediately smothered by the fog. "Down there, on the main deck! Who's there?" But there came never an answering sound, and the 3 of us stood there, looking quickly this way and that, and listening. Abruptly the second mate muttered something. "The lookout, sir! The lookout!" Captain Joldy took the hint on the instant. "On the lookout there!" he shouted, and then far away the muffled sounding, there came the answering cry of the lookout man from the forecastle ahead. "Sir," a little voice, long drawn out, through unknowable alleys of fog. "Go below into the forecastle and shut both doors and don't stir out till you're told, even," sung out Captain Joldy, his voice going lost into the mist. And then the man's answering, "Aye, aye, sir," coming to us faint and mournful, and directly afterwards the clang of a steel door, hollow-sounding and remote, and immediately the sound of another. "That puts them safe for the present, anyway," said the second mate. And even as he spoke, there came again that indefinite noise down upon the main deck, of something moving with an incredible and unnatural stealthiness. "On the main deck there," shouted Captain Joldy sternly. "If there is anyone there, answer, or I shall fire." The reply was both amazing and terrifying, for suddenly a tremendous blow was stricken upon the deck, and then there came the dull, rolling sound of some enormous weight going hollowly across the main deck, and then an abominable silence. "My God!" said Captain Joldy in a low voice. "What was that?" And he raised his pistol, but I caught him by the wrist. "Don't shoot, sir," I whispered. "It'll be no good. That whatever it is, I mean, it's something enormous, sir. I wouldn't shoot." I found it impossible to put my vague idea into words, but I felt there was a force aboard down on the main deck, that it would be futile to attack with so ineffectual a thing as a puny revolver bullet. And then, as I held Captain Joldy's wrist and he hesitated, irresolute, there came a sudden bleating of sheep and the sound of lashings being burst in the cracking of wood. And the next instant a huge crash followed by crash after crash and the anguished bang of sheep. "My God!" said the second mate. "The sheep pen's being beaten to pieces against the deck. Good God, what sort of thing could do that?" The tremendous beating ceased, and there was a splashing overside, and after that a silence so profound that it seemed as if the whole atmosphere of the night was full of an unbearable tense quietness. And then the damp slatting of a sail far up in the night that made me start, a lonesome sound to break suddenly through that infernal silence upon my raw nerves. "Get below, both of you, smartly now," muttered Captain Geldy. "There's something run either aboard us or alongside, and we can't do anything till daylight." We went below and shut the doors of the companionway, and there we lay in the wide Atlantic without wheel or lookout or officer in charge, and something incredible down on the dark main deck. Part 2. For some hours we sat in the captain's cabin talking the matter over whilst the watch slept, sprawled in a dozen attitudes on the floor of the saloon. Captain Geldy and the second mate still wore their pyjamas, and our loaded revolvers lay handy on the cabin table. And so we watched anxiously through the hours for the dawn to come in. As the light strengthened, we endeavoured to get some view of the sea from the ports, but the mist was so thick about us that it was exactly like looking out into a grey nothingness that became presently white as the day came. "Now," said Captain Geldy, "we're going to look into this." He went out through the saloon to the companion stairs. At the top he opened the two doors, and the mist rolled in on us, white and impenetrable. For a little while we stood there, the three of us absolutely silent and listening with our revolvers handy. But never a sound came to us except the odd, vague slatting of a rail, or the slight creaking of the gear as the ship lifted on some slow, invisible swell. Presently the captain stepped cautiously out onto the deck. He was in his cabin slippers and therefore made no sound. I was wearing gumboots and followed him silently, and the second mate after me in his bare feet. Captain Geldy went a few paces along the deck, and the mist hid him utterly. "Whew!" I heard him mutter. "The stink's worse than ever." His voice came odd and vague to me through the wreathing of the mist. "The sun'll soon eat up all this fog," said the second mate at my elbow in a voice a little above a whisper. We stepped after the captain and found him a couple of fathoms away, standing shrouded in the mist in an attitude of tense listening. "Can't hear a thing," he whispered. "We'll go forward to the break as quiet as you like. Don't make a sound." We went forward like three shadows, and suddenly Captain Geldy kicked his shin against something and pitched headlong over it, making a tremendous noise. He got up quickly, swearing grimly, and the three of us stood there in silence, waiting lest any infernal thing should come upon us out of all that white invisibility. Once I felt sure I saw something coming towards me, and I raised my revolver, but saw in a moment that there was nothing. The tension of imminent nervous expectancy eased from us, and Captain Geldy stooped over the object on the deck. "The port hen coop's been shifted out here," he muttered. "It's all stove." "That must be what I heard last night when the mate went," I whispered. "There was a loud crash just before he sang out to me to hurry with the lamp." Captain Geldy left the smashed hen coop, and the three of us tiptoed silently to the rail across the break of the poop. Here we leaned over and stared down into the blank whiteness of the mist that hid everything. "Can't see a thing," whispered the second mate. Yet as he spoke I could fancy that I heard a slight, indefinite slurring noise somewhere below us, and I caught each of them by an arm to draw them back. "There's something down there," I muttered. "For goodness sake, come back from the rail." We gave back a step or two and then stopped to listen, and even as we did so there came a slight air playing through the mist. "The breeze is coming," said the second mate. "Look, the mist is clearing already." He was right. Already the look of white impenetrability had gone, and suddenly we could see the corner of the after-hatch coamings through the thinning fog. Within a minute, we could see as far forward as the mainmast, and then the stuff blew away from us, clear of the vessel like a great wall of whiteness that dissipated as it went. "Look!" we all exclaimed together. The whole of the vessel was now clear to our sight, but it was not at the ship herself that we looked, for after one quick glance along the empty main deck we had seen something beyond the ship's side. All around the vessel there lay a submerged spread of weed for maybe a good quarter of a mile upon every side. "Weed!" sang out Captain Geldy in a voice of comprehension. "Weed! Look, by Jove, I guess I know now what got the mate." He turned and ran to the port side and looked over, and suddenly he stiffened and beckoned silently over his shoulder to us to come and see. We had followed, and now we stood, one on each side of him, staring. "Look!" "No." "Look!" whispered the captain, pointing. "See the great brute? Do you see it? There! Look!" At first I could see nothing except the submerged spread of the weed into which we had evidently run after dark. Then, as I stared intently, my gaze began to separate from the surrounding weed a leathery-looking something that was somewhat darker in hue than the weed itself. "My God," said Captain Geldy. "What a monster! What a monster! Just look at that brute! Look at the thing's eyes! That's what got the mate! What a creature out of hell itself!" I saw it plainly now. 3 of the massive feelers lay twined in and out among the clumpings of the weed, and then, abruptly, I realized that the 2 extraordinary round discs, motionless and inscrutable, were the creature's eyes, just below the surface of the water. It appeared to be staring, expressionless, up at the steel side of the vessel. I traced vaguely the shapeless monstrosity of what must be termed its head. "My God," I muttered, "it's an enormous squid of some kind. What an awful brute!" "What?" The sharp report of the captain's revolver came at that moment. He had fired at the thing, and instantly there was a most awful commotion alongside. The weed was hove upward, literally in tons. An enormous quantity was thrown aboard us by the thrashing of the monster's great feelers. The sea seemed almost to boil, in one great cauldron of weed and water all about the brute, and the steel side of the ship resounded with the dull, tremendous blows that the creature gave in its struggle. And into all that whirling boil of tentacles, weed and sea-water, the 3 of us emptied our revolvers as fast as we could fire and reload. I remember the feeling of fierce satisfaction I had in thus aiding to avenge the death of the mate. Suddenly the captain roared out to us to jump back, and we obeyed on the instant. As we did so, the weed rose up into a great mound over 20 feet in height, and more than a ton of it slopped aboard. The next instant 3 of the monstrous tentacles came in over the side, and the vessel gave a slow, sullen roll to port as the weight came upon her, for the monster had literally hove itself almost free of the sea against our port side, in one vast, leathery shape, all wreathed with weed fronds, and seeming drenched with blood and curious black liquid. The feelers that had come inboard thrashed round here and there, and suddenly one of them curled in the most hideous snake-like fashion around the base of the mainmast. This seemed to attract it, for immediately it curled the two others about the mast, and forthwith wrenched upon it with such hideous violence that the whole towering length of spars, through all their height of 150 feet, were shaken visibly, whilst the vessel herself vibrated with the stupendous efforts of the brute. "It'll have the mast down, sir," said the second mate with a gasp. "My God, it'll strain her side open. One of those blasting cartridges," I said to Geldy almost in a shout as the inspiration took me. "Blow the brute to pieces." "Get one, quick," said the captain, jerking his thumb towards the companion. "You know where they are." In 30 seconds I was back with the cartridge. Captain Geldy took out his knife and cut the fuse dead short. Then, with a steady hand, he lit the fuse and calmly held it, until I backed away, shouting to him to throw it, for I knew it must explode in another couple of seconds. Captain Geldy threw the thing, like one throws a quoit, so that it fell into the sea just on the outward side of the vast bulk of the monster. So well had he timed it that the burst, with a stunning report... so well had he timed it that it burst, with a stunning report, just as it struck the water. The effect upon the squid was amazing. It seemed literally to collapse. The enormous tentacles released themselves from the mast and curled across the deck helplessly, and were drawn inertly over the rail, as the enormous bulk sank away from the ship's side out of sight into the weed. The ship rolled slowly to starboard and then steadied. "Thank God," I muttered, and looked at the two others. They were pallid and sweating, and I must have been the same. "Here's the breeze again," said the second mate a minute later. "We're moving." He turned without another word and raced aft to the wheel, whilst the vessel slid over and through the weed field. Meanwhile, Captain Geldy had sung out to the men who had opened the port forecastle door to keep under cover until he told them to come out. Then he turned to have a look at the vessel itself. "Look, where the brute broke up the sheep pen," he cried, pointing. "And here's the skylight of the sail locker smashed to bits." He walked across to it and glanced down. And suddenly he let out a thunderous shout of astonishment. "Here's the mate down here!" he shouted. "He's not overboard at all! He's here!" He dropped himself down through the skylight onto the sails, and I after him, and surely there was the mate lying all huddled and insensible on a hammock of spare sails. In his right hand he held a drawn sheath knife, which he was in the habit of carrying, A.B. fashion, whilst his left hand was all caked with dried blood where he had been badly cut. Afterwards we concluded he had cut himself in slashing at one of the tentacles of the squid, which had caught him round the left wrist, the tip of the tentacle being still curled cruelly tight about his arm, just as it had been when he hacked it through. For the rest, he was not seriously damaged, the creature having obviously flung him violently away as he slashed at it, so that he had crashed through the framework of the skylight and so had fallen in a stunned condition onto the pile of sails. We got him on deck and down into his bunk, where we left the steward to attend to him. When we returned to the poop, the vessel had drawn clear of the weed field, and the captain and I stopped for a few moments to stare astern over the taffrail. The second mate turned also, as he stood at the wheel, and the three of us looked in a silence at that death patch laying now so quiet and sullen in the dawn. As we stood and looked, something wavered up out of the heart of the weed, a long, tapering, sinuous thing that curled and wavered against the dawn light, and presently sank back again into the demure weed, a veritable spider of the deep, waiting in the great web that Dame Nature had spun for it, in the eddy of her tides and currents. And we sailed away northwards with strengthening trades, and left that patch of monstrousness to the loneliness of the sea. And also all the sheep and chickens were fine. Their cage was broken and they escaped onto the deck and were completely fine. And they had a lovely voyage too. The end. That last bit was also there too. They tend to leave it off the web pages and stuff, but it was there. They were fine. They were fine. I did nearly laugh when I looked up at chat and saw weed. That's what got the mate. I told him to stay away from the devil's lettuce, and the fog was just smoke from the weed. Thank you for those very good, very accurate contributions. Yes. Please take the story seriously. It was refreshing to have an authority figure in a horror story be like, yeah, it's dark, we're going to wait until daylight, instead of insisting on blundering around in the dark and getting eaten. Yes, although I did like on that it's like, right, it's dark, we're going to just go to bed, I'm going to put on my gym jams, I'm going to have a sleep, and we'll get up in the morning, see what it's like. They get up in the morning, still foggy. Still can't see a thing. but now the fog is white instead of black. So, yeah, but I don't know. I like that one. It, as I was kind of alluding to, perhaps mysteriously at the start, it bears a lot in common with, frankly, many things. A tropical horror, the derelicts, two things. But yeah, it sort of it feels like it's got notes from both of those, but I like it. It's good. The Willows too. Yes. I'm trying to think about it. I mean, that's a different author, but yeah. But that does remind me, I do need to read some more Blackwood, because I really enjoyed The Willows. I thought it was great, and yes, I need to read more Algernon Blackwood. But if I crash straight on into it, although there were some other things about the one that I think I wanted to say because it was funny. Although I can't remember what. Maybe we'll come back to it. Blackwood is fab, we like? Yes, we do. In the middle of that one, I remembered in the Whistling Room, I kind of liked that, like, right near the start, when he's sort of introducing the characters and they're talking about the room, and they're like, where is it? I need to find it. It sort of establishes, it's like Tasik is American, and it's like, Tasik and his sons, they're Americans. We're all carrying guns, said the boy and slapped his coat pocket. It's like, well, perhaps the stereotype didn't exist then, but it's kind of funny to me now. It's like, howdy, we've got guns. We're going to shoot this ghost. It just made me chuckle. But yes, let's crash on to the last story and see if I can... I've not actually read this one in a little while. So I'm going to be a little bit rusty on it. Rustier than I have been on the other ones this evening, but hey, let's do it anyway. This one is that... Oh wow, this is actually written, because they've got the dates on these stories as well to say when they were written. That one, Thing of the Weeds, was written in 1916. Okay. No, The Whistling Room were you 19... I've read something that was written in 1910 this evening. Whistling Room was 1910. Out of the Storm was written in 1909. And it's a short one, so we're going to do this and then we're going to finish. But this is Out of the Storm. Hush, said my friend, the scientist, as I walked into his laboratory. I had opened my lips to speak, but stood silent for a few minutes at his request. He was sitting at his instrument, and the thing was tapping out a message in a curiously irregular fashion, stopping a few seconds, then going on at a furious pace. It was during a somewhat longer than usual pause that, growing slightly impatient, I ventured to address him. "Anything important?" I asked. "For God's sake, shut up!" he answered back in a high, strained voice. I stared. I am used to pretty abrupt treatment from him at times when he is much engrossed in some particular experiment, but this was going a little too far, and I said so. He was writing, and, for reply, he pushed several loosely written sheets over to me with one curt word. "Read!" With a sense half of anger, half of curiosity, I picked up the first and glanced at it. After a few lines I was gripped and held securely by a morbid interest. I was reading a message from one in the last extremity. I will give it word for word. "John, we are sinking. I wonder if you really understand what I feel at the present time. You, sitting comfortably in your laboratory, I, out here upon the waters, already one among the dead. Yes, we are doomed. There is no such thing as help in our case. We are sinking, steadily, remorselessly. God, I must keep up and be a man. I need not tell you that I am in the operator's room. All the rest are on deck, or dead, in the hungry thing which is smashing the ship to pieces. I do not know where we are, and there is no one of whom I can ask. The last of the officers was drowned nearly an hour ago, and the vessel is now little more than a sort of breakwater for the giant seas. Once, about half an hour ago, I went out onto the deck. My God, the sight was terrible. It is a little after midday, but the sky is the colour of mud, Do you understand? Grey mud. Down from it there hang vast lappets of cloud. Not such clouds as I have ever before seen, but monstrous, mildewed-looking hulls. They show solid, save where the frightful wind tears their lower edges into great feelers that swirl savagely above us, like the tentacles of some enormous horror. Such a sight is difficult to describe to the living, though the dead of the sea know of it without words of mine. It is such a sight that none is allowed to see and live. It is a picture for the doomed and the dead, one of the sea's hell orgies, one of the thing's monstrous gloatings over the living, say the alive in death, those upon the brink. I have no right to tell of it to you. To speak of it to one of the living is to initiate innocence into one of the infernal mysteries, to talk of foul things to a child. Yet I care not. I will expose, in all its hideous nakedness, the death side of the sea. The undoomed living shall know some of the things that death has hitherto so well guarded. Death knows not of this little instrument beneath my hands that connects me still with the quick, else would he haste to quiet me. Hark you, John, I have learnt undreamt of things in this little time of waiting. I know now why we are afraid of the dark. I had never imagined such secrets of the sea and the grave, which are one and the same. Listen. But I was forgetting you cannot hear. I can. The sea is... Hush. The sea is laughing, as though a hell cackled from the mouth of an ass. It is jeering. I can hear its voice echo like satanic thunder amid the mud overhead. It is calling to me. Call. I must go. The sea calls. Oh, God, art thou indeed God? Canst thou sit above and watch calmly that which I have just seen? Nay, thou art no God. Thou art weak and puny beside this foul thing which thou didst create in thy lusty youth. It is now God, and I am one of its children. Are you there, John? Why don't you answer? Listen, I ignore God, for there is a stronger than he. My God is here beside me, around me, and will be soon above me. You know what that means. It is merciless. The sea is now all the God there is. That is one of the things I have learnt. Listen, it is laughing again. God is it, not he. It called, and I went out onto the decks. All was terrible. It is in the waist, everywhere. It has swamped the ship. Only the forecastle, bridge, and poop stick up out from the bestial, reeking thing like 3 islands in the midst of shrieking foam. At times gigantic billows assail the ship from both sides. They form momentary arches above the vessel, arches of dull, curved water 100 feet towards the hideous sky. Then they descend, roaring. Think of it. You cannot. There is an infection of sin in the air. It is the exhalations from the thing. Those left upon the drenched islets of shattered wood and iron are doing the most horrible things. The thing is teaching them. Later I felt the violin forming of its breath, but I have fled back here to pray for death. On the forecastle I saw a mother and her little son clinging to an iron rail. A great billow heaved up above them, descended in a falling mountain of brine. It passed and they were still there. The thing was only toying with them. Yet, all the same, it had torn the hands of the child from the rail, and the child was clinging frantically to its mother's arm. I saw another vast hill hurl up to port and hover above them. Then The mother stooped and bit like a foul beast at the hands of her wee son. She was afraid that his little additional weight would be more than she could hold. I heard his scream, even where I stood. It drove to me upon that wild laughter. It told me again that God is not he, but it. Then the hill thundered down upon those two. It seemed to me that the thing gave a bellow as it leapt. It roared about them, churning and growling, then surged away. And there was only one, the mother. There appeared to me to be blood as well as water upon her face, especially about her mouth, but the distance was too great, and I cannot be sure. I looked away. Close to me I saw something further. A beautiful young girl, her soul hideous with the breath of the thing, struggling with her sweetheart for the shelter of the chart-house side. He threw her off, but she came back at him. I saw her hand come from her head, where still clung the wreckage of some form of headgear. She struck at him. He shouted and fell away to leeward, and she smiled, showing her teeth. So much for that. I turned elsewhere. Out upon the thing I saw gleams, horrid and suggestive below the crests of the waves. I have never seen them until this time. I saw a rough sailorman washed away from the vessel. One of the huge breakers snapped at him. Those things were teeth. It has teeth. I heard them clash. I heard his yell. It was no more than a mosquito shrilling amid all that laughter, but it was very terrible. There is worse than death. The ship is lurching very queerly with a sort of sickening heave. I fancy I've been asleep. No, I remember now. I hit my head when she rolled so strangely. My leg is doubled under me. I think it is broken, but it does not matter. I have been praying. What was it? I feel calmer, more resigned now. I think I have been mad. What was it that I was saying? I cannot remember. It was something about God. I believe I blasphemed. May he forgive me. Thou knowest, God, that I was not in my right mind. Thou knowest that I am very weak. Be with me in the coming time. I have sinned, but thou art all merciful. Are you there, John? It is very near the end now. I have so much to say, but it all slips from me. What was it that I said? I take it all back. I was mad, and God knows, he is merciful, and I have very little pain now. I feel a bit drowsy. I wonder whether you are there, John. Perhaps, after all, no one has heard the things I have said. It is better so. The living are not meant, and yet I do not know. If you are there, John, you will tell her how it was, but not... Hark! There was such a thunder of water overhead just then. I fancy two vast seas have met in mid-air across the top of the bridge and burst all over the vessel. It must be soon now. And there were such a number of things I had to say. I can hear voices in the wind. They are singing. It is like an enormous dirge. I think I have been dozing again. I pray, God, humbly that it be soon. You will not tell her anything about what I may have said, will you, John? I mean those things which I ought not to have said. What was it I did say? My head is growing strangely confused. I wonder whether you really do hear me. I may be talking only to the vast roar outside. Still, it is some comfort to go on, and I will not believe that you do not hear all I say. Hark again! A mountain of brine must have swept clean over the vessel. She has gone right over onto her side. She is back again. It will be very soon now. Are you there, John? Are you there? It is coming. The sea has come for me. It is rushing down through the companionway. It is like a vast jet. My God, I'm drowning. And that is the end of Out of the Storm. Thank you for listening. And that's where we shall finish for tonight. Ta-da! It wasn't a monster, it was just weather. I'm sure, yeah, he was probably fine. That's just like the little Morse code button that he was using. Just got a little bit waterlogged. Interesting way to tell a story. Why, thank you. Oh, you mean the writer? Well... yeah, I enjoy that one. He's allergic to water? No! Aspirin man, your only weakness. Why did you go on the boat? But yes, that was that. And so concludes the last story that shall be read on the channel before next week when Book Week working title goes live. Or he was bored and just messing with his friend. Yeah, just like, yeah, that's just a kid. Just got a hold of the transmitter and just beep 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 trolling. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, let's go with that. He was fine. Everyone was fine. Or by some sheer coincidence, they were writing in another language, and that's just how, and just bizarrely, that's how it comes through in Morse code as perfect like it just sounds like English, and that means something. No, that doesn't work at all. Look, I'm tired, and we have a lot of reading to do next week. Right, I am going to wrap things up there and say goodbye and good night and send you all out into the world, but where do we want to go? Oh, Wonder Asthma is on, and possibly has just gone live. I'm just quickly going to click and check. But if so, I would like to raid over there. Yeah, literally just gone live. Oh no, had to restart OBS. Right, okay. Cool, then we are going to go over there, because that is a lovely channel, and they have such a really good voice, and they may still be reading The Metamorphosis by a good old Franz Kafka. How am I spelling that? Like that. There we go. But yes, do please come back. Well, tomorrow to Dave's channel for some D's and D's, and then on Monday for the start of Book Week. You know the details, so I'm not going to run through it all again because I'm on a timer for the raid. But thank you all so much for being here, for listening to these stories, for supporting the channel with the subs, and your attention. We appreciate every bit of it. And yeah, we will see you on the Discord, probably see some of you in Padia, those that are playing that, because it's a lovely chill game. And yes, goodbye, good night, be well, enjoy whatever weekend you have remaining to you. Thank you, and good night.